welcome to the Upward Slopes podcast. I'm your host, Katie Hemphill, and today we get to dive straight into the topic that speaks so loudly to me these days as embodied living and collective healing. That is, this topic that shows you how to get out of your head, heal your body, and be in aligned action in a way that is not only fulfilling to you, but also brings about transformation to this world in a way that means something. Transformation that means something, that alleviates pain and suffering, that brings real joy, that leaves us feeling so full that we just can't help but give more to this world. So that's what we get to talk about today. And to do it, to walk you through this topic, I have a few different ways of doing so. I have 2 or 3 stories to share depending on time and how this all flows. I have a practical process to teach you, this process for creating real transformation that came to me in a time that I really needed it most. And also here today, I have practice. I have real embodied practice that you can step into if you wish. Now, there's something to know about how this podcast unfolds in regard to how I share this very short series of stories that kind of weave together and build upon each other so that when I teach you this practical process in the second half, we've really spent some time creating space and building the energy so that we're ready for when I start to teach this process. Now, I know there are some of you out there who are like, just give me the practical tidbits. Just give me what I need so that I can move on with my life, being better at making decisions and making that transformation in my life. And yes, I want that for you. I want that so bad for you, actually, that I am going to ask you that you trust me here and that there's a reason that I structure this podcast in the way that I do, that I give us some stories in the first 20 minutes or so to really set the stage to create space for what gets to unfold, so that when it comes time to teach you what I want to teach you today, you are in a space that is receptive and is ready to take it in as you will for today. With that last little note, just knowing that this process is rich, it goes deep, it's complex, and with that, know that we really just get to scratch the surface today, but that's okay because what my intention really is to deliver this information to you in a way that it lands for you in a way that impacts your life in a way that's needed most right now. With that being said, if you want to go deeper in this process, really immerse yourself in it, reach out directly to me and I will show you where we can go to really deepen into this process. Okay, now switching back to today's topic here in episode 2 of this Upward Slopes podcast. Let's talk about how it is that we can really step into states of deep transformation that really means something to our own selves and means something for the greater world that we are part of. Now, to get started with this, I want to begin with a couple stories, beginning by bringing you to this space that I spoke a little bit about in episode 1, a time 2020, as time was unfolding day after day, week after week, month after month, with me, my own self, spending so much of this time alone in an apartment in a city that I really didn't want to be in, looking out on the world that was just in complete chaos and destruction, the likes of which I had never witnessed before. And it's at this time that I was in my own personal struggle in a way that I really just felt defeated. I'd been working so hard to make something, to bring something into this world that meant something. And I'd just been smacking up against so much resistance for so long. But there was this fire burning within me that just kept pushing me to make something of this project that I'd spent years on. Again, to get it to mean something, to really impact people, to change people's lives for the better. So here I am, alone, day after day, searching for answers, really in the world of science, in the world of the mind, and using my own mind's ability to make sense of it. So this project had everything to do with metabolic health. As I'd been training as a biomedical engineer, spending my time in academia, I'd really gotten to know the human body, and that includes as it functions in what we could call a healthy way, when things are working well and the body's functioning in a way that really just enables us to go about our lives without having any real concern about what's going on inside of ourselves. And that also involved understanding how the body breaks down, how dysfunction arises, and how disease arises. And also at this time, I'd found myself just so curious about human behavior and spending all this extra time taking psychology classes and neuroscience classes so that I could understand the human mind. And when I graduated, I decided that I wanted to bring all this together to work to understand how it is that we make behavioral choices that tend to drive the progression of disease, common diseases that are so prevalent in our world, those big ones: cardiovascular disease, cancers, diabetes, many dementias. There's this whole umbrella of diseases that have complex root causes, and yet have causes that really tend to stem from the same issues, which can be tied to our behavioral choices. Now, anytime I talk about this topic, we have to be very careful as we navigate through it, because what I don't want to do is say something that triggers some sort of defensive something in you because you've experienced something. Again, these diseases are vastly complex, which, becomes a very important part of the story. As I did my best to navigate all this rich complexity in a way that led me to be able to help people, truly help people make decisions that lead to action that truly did benefit their health, while not doing the thing that I saw so many people doing, which was voicing opinions, oh, you should just do this and don't do that. Eat this, not that. All these opinions that were really getting so noisy in the health sphere. And this is really what was happening so strongly leading up to 2020 and then really exploded during this time where a pandemic was what was in the mainstream. And again, there's so much here that's just really crunchy and not something that I want to dig into deeply, but just sort of setting the stage for me being in this really crunchy space where there is a lot of, shall I say, harm being done. Harm being done by people who, like myself, had spent a lot of time doing our best to understand the science and then finding solutions that could help, seeing clearly data, studies showing, yes, if you change your diet to this diet, it can help. And then taking this information and putting it out into the world in a way that is really complicated, because some people would take that message and, try out that diet, try out that lifestyle change and receive amazing benefits. And at the same time, so many people would be lost in this whole chaotic maze of information overload that really was just toxic, is actively harming the population in the way that I saw health coaches and other sort of influencers really genuinely trying to do their best to make the world better. And so here I am, it's 2020 and there's this fire burning within me because I have all this information. I've done the research. I knew the human body and I wanted to be able to help people, but I saw that the way that we were doing it was actually very harmful. And it's here alone in an apartment in a city day after day, just holding space for this and doing all I could to make sense of this, while also looking out on a world that was in just complete chaos, overwhelming chaos. Again, I don't need to go into all the details of what happened during that time. We were all there. We all witnessed what happened as one thing after the next came to the surface in very dark, painful ways at a global level. And as I sat in my apartment doing everything I could to work on this own project that meant everything to me, and looking out on a world that was also just in this same chaos, well, it's here in this space that something within me started to shift. Something started to transform. And it's in this space that, shall I say, I sort of birthed this process that I'm going to teach you later on in the podcast. The process for how it is we can really follow this path of intentional transformation in a way that minimizes harm while truly leading to those beneficial outcomes that we are seeking. But before jumping into that process, there's a couple things I want to do. So first, really pointing to this question that I was holding at this point in time. That is, when we have a problem and when we have all this knowledge that exists within the context of this problem, that is, we have a problem and we have information, we have data that can help us point to an answer. However, within this context, we're stuck, right? We're stuck. We're trying so hard and we're fueled because, again, we have some information, we have some data, and we're trying so hard because we believe we see the path forward. We can see it, but we can't actually get through that brick wall that keeps stopping us. And we just can't see how it is that we actually get to that outcome that we know is possible. So, in just a moment for your own reflection here, is there something in your world, in your life, that comes up as I speak to this? Just a moment to sit with it. As this comes up, what comes up with it? What thoughts, what feelings, what emotions, what arises in your field of consciousness as we hold space for this? You got it? Okay. So at this point, we're actually going to jump forward into a second story. We're going to jump forward about a year or so. So it's the spring of 2022. I've moved out of the city. I am back home on my homelands here in northern New Mexico, and I'm spending time pretty much daily, sometimes more than once a day, out on the trails in my backyard forest. Except it doesn't look much like a forest. If it weren't for the blackened, still standing skeletons of ponderosas sticking high up into the air, and if it weren't for the matrix of fallen ponderosas that sort of form the ground of this area, if it weren't for these ponderosas that have been left behind after the fire that burned more than 20 years ago, if it weren't for these remnants that live in this environment that's too dry for them to even decompose, if it weren't for them, you probably wouldn't even know that this used to be a spectacular ponderosa forest. Instead, what you'd see is desert, dry dirt, upon which is living locusts, which are these thorny bushes, and shrub oak, lots of shrub oak, this desert shrubland that now forms my backyard. It's in this space that I walked, sometimes ran, sometimes wandered as I would find a place to sit and just be. So it's in this space that I was spending so much time in the spring of 2022. And it's in this time that I spent out there that within me was, a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain primarily in the form of grief. There's also pain in the form of despair because, again, I'd been watching the world around me as it continued to spiral in this dark chaos. And I just didn't have a lot of hope for it all. And meanwhile, I'd been dealing with my own mess of my own life and the pain and grief that existed there. And I'm out here every day on the trails. And in this particular time, I'd be walking along, placing my foot down on the dry dirt and listening to the crunch of that dry dirt that hadn't received rain for weeks, months. And then I'd be inhaling. And as I inhaled, I would inhale smoke. I'd inhale smoke from the multiple fires that were burning around me, depending on the direction the wind blew. Some days I'd be inhaling the smoke that was blowing my way from the fire burning just miles to the south. Yes, just miles, which put us on high alert for the fact that our town that had already received damage from fire when I was a child, our town was once again on a potential evacuation order. So, of course, there was that added stress. But other days, the wind would blow in from the east. And just to the east, over in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, was the most horrific fire that I've ever witnessed, the most horrific fire that I hope I ever have to witness. Looking over in this mountain range that houses this old forest, every day I'd look over and see a plume of smoke shooting hundreds of feet up into the air, looking like a bomb had been dropped and exploding the forest. Day after day, 500,000 acres of the Sangre de Cristos burned in that fire. And as I walked the trails in my own backyard, used to be forest, among the skeletons of ponderosas that I never got to know, as I walked these trails, I had nothing to do but to feel it all. And to feel the pain, the grief of this mass deforestation that is happening in my part of the world. To feel the pain of the world around me as us humans deal with our own horrific shit. And at the same time, dealing with my own grief, my own pain that came from the decisions I'd made in the past and in the very harsh consequences of those decisions. And again, in this space, really nothing else to do but to feel it all. And I say that because it's in this space that my mind that I had come to prize more than anything. It's in this space that my mind had no power. It could do nothing to make sense of, to wrap itself around what was going on. It could see no solutions, no inkling of possibility for how it is that we get out of these spaces. So what I've done here is set up a sort of polarity between the world that exists up in our heads and the world that exists as felt experiences in and as our bodies. In the first story, I was really moving out of this world where I'd been so stuck up in my head. I'd lived my whole life in the world of academics and was doing what I could to translate this into the real world, the world that is tangible, the world that is felt. And in doing so, really found myself in a time where this transition got extreme. So extreme that I was pulled down. Oftentimes we call this sort of experience a descent, as we're really pulled down into what we could call the underworld, this dark world where nothing means anything anymore. The mind has been stripped away in a way where all that's really left to do is to feel. And when this happens, the process isn't very pleasant. In my case, it was extremely dark and painful. And here, stripped away from the world of the mind, all that was left to do was feel. And feel in a way that, as these things do unfold for people far beyond myself, right? This is my own story, but it's also a story that happens all the time in our day and age and throughout our human history. This descent where the world as we knew it is stripped away and our minds and all our mental constructs fall away, and we're forced to change. We're forced to undergo a transformation that can often isn't pleasant, is often dark and painful, but does lead into a world where everything is now experienced in a much truer way. So I mentioned before that change doesn't happen in this linear way that we tell ourselves it should happen. Sometimes to create real transformation, what is required is really a descent away from the things that we believe to be true, we think are true, but aren't actually bringing us into the spaces that we want to be in, the spaces where we want to see real transformation happening. Sometimes what is required is what feels like an experience where we're being torn away from it all so that we can see the world in a truer way. Now, here's the thing. What I experienced over those few years, at least to me, doesn't seem so ideal. You know, when I think about wanting to help people and help our world, what I want to avoid is pain. What I want to keep us away from is pain and suffering. So what I want to do with the rest of this time is to teach what I have learned in this process, this very simple process that really came to me back in 2020, again, in this time where I spent so much time really holding space for this question. And, you know, back then it really existed in the context of physical health, specifically metabolic health, but it's a process that's universal in regard to how we make decisions to complex problems. You know, going back to that reflection practice I asked you to do earlier in this episode, when we're facing any sort of challenge where, again, you know, our minds are involved, we really believe we have information that can help us make decisions that lead to the outcomes that we envision. You know, when we're in that world of the headspace, that we're unable to actually take action because, again, we're hitting up against resistance. There's some sort of disconnect between what we see in our heads and the reality that we want to unfold. When we find ourselves in these spaces, what do we do? And again, this may be something like some sort of health challenge, right? Some physical, something with your body that, you know, maybe you have some ideas, maybe you know what you think you should be doing, but can't get yourself to take action in a way that leads to the outcome you want. Or maybe it's something going on outside of yourself in the world we live in, you know, some sort of activism you want to be a part of, some solution that you want to bring into the world. And again, you're holding this idea, right? You want this change to happen, but you can't seem to make it happen. Now, there's a couple different reasons that might be the case. And on one side, so remember our polarity here, on one side, sometimes we get too stuck up in our heads. Sometimes what's really happening is we're so immersed in the world of information that direct translation into the world just isn't really possible, right? We're not able to connect the dots that we think we can connect. Now, I also need to make sure we talk about the flip side because the flip side is super important. And to speak to it, I want to share one more part of the story that was really unfolding in, shall we call it, the 2020 pandemic timeframe. And I know that you guys were all there watching the same things play out. So if you will, travel back with me in your own memory to 2020, and everything is a shitstorm. There are all these problems that keep coming to the surface in these very dark ways. And as it's happening, there are all these voices out there that are yelling at each other, screaming at each other. And from where we're standing, there's these two sides that are forming, and the sides don't really make that much sense. But for whatever reason, it's become an us against them as problem after problem keeps arising. And these problems are really complex. On the surface, some of them have very simple solutions, very simple things we could do to make things much better. But given the complicated nature that is human life, we are all watching from this place that's like, we don't really know what to do. And again, it's not that we don't have information. We have information that is pointing us to take action in logical ways that we see could really make a difference, could really help us to overcome the problem, or at least create some change that really means something. But again, when we look back out on the world, things are so chaotic. Things are so dark that it's actually really difficult, if not sometimes impossible, to take action in a way that means anything. Okay, so do we have it? Are we all there? So as we're here and looking out on the world, and there's just all these voices that again are screaming at each other. I'm right, you're wrong. I have the right answers, you have the wrong answers. What you're doing is bad, what I'm doing is good. And again, there's all these voices, all these people that think they're in action, that are doing something. But really, what's happening is that all we're doing is adding noise to an already very noisy problem. We're just adding to the chaos, making things so much worse because we're being fueled by emotion. We're being fueled by wanting to do something, but things are so messy that being in action this way is really just making things worse. So what do we do? What do we do in these times? So it's at this point that I want to introduce step 1 of this 4-step process for creating real, valuable change. And it's a step that came to me very clearly, very powerfully when I was in this time. Again, a time when I was so stuck in my own head, so stuck trying to solve my own problems and make a difference in this world. And I'm looking out on a world that is so mixed up in its own dark chaos, and everything is so painful and nothing makes sense. And it came to me that the most important thing to do in this time is to stop, is to press pause. Press pause on it all. Take a step back. Take a step back away from it all. Like, just fucking stop. Take a pause. Take a step back. Maybe take a few breaths. Find your feet on the floor. Breathe some more. And what this does is it starts to create space. We have a problem on our hands. There's this big challenge facing us. It may be an individual problem. It may be a collective problem. And we're trying so hard, but nothing seems to be doing anything. What do? We pause. Feel your feet on the floor. Take some nice breaths. As you take those breaths, really feel them down in your body. Feel the rise in your belly. Feel that expansion in your chest as you inhale. Feel into that nice release on the exhale. Take several breaths just like this. Breathing down in your body, breathing as your body, as you are grounded in the space that you are in at this point in time. Here, what we're doing is creating space. And I can tell you that if we're going to do anything to really create the change that the world is asking of us right now, we need space. We need a whole bunch of space. We need these spacious containers so that we can get to work. And that leads us into step 2. What do we do once we've made space? What do we do once we've grounded down into our bodies and are holding this space? Well, what we get to do now is start to fill it. And as we fill this space, what we want to bring in is information, data. What can help us make the most skillful decision at this point in time? And as we do this, it's so important to know. It's everything to know that information comes in so many different beautiful flavors. Information can come from science. When I was doing my master's degree, being a scientist, I was in the lab gathering data, following the painstaking scientific process. And in this process, we are able to gather information in a way that is beautiful, that really has the potential to mean everything. But it's not everything. There are so many other ways to cultivate information. Another beautiful way to gather information is your direct experience. What do you feel? What do you know? What is alive inside of you? What is alive as you, as your direct felt experience? This information is just as valid in this space. What about the voices of others? The voices of a friend or an expert? There are voices around you that are sharing their own information based off their own experiences, their own beliefs. This information can also be useful. So as we're holding space, right, we're holding space for how it is that we can make the best decision possible. We're grounded in our bodies and we're collecting information. What does the science say? What does that scientist say? What does my own body tell me? What do my friends tell me? There's such a wealth of information in our world today, and we need to be able to call upon it in the most skillful way possible. We don't do this by shutting down one form of information over another. We do this by recognizing that information comes in so many different flavors and being so fucking grateful that we, at this time in our history, have access to it on a global level. Like, how amazing is that? What we don't want to do is get caught up in any one piece. And what we don't want to do is get overwhelmed with it. So with this, what I want to start doing is moving into step 3, because where we get stuck here, and this is where I was stuck for years, is we get stuck in the information. We get so overwhelmed because there's too many different possibilities and there's not a clear step forward. So we get stuck because we're paralyzed by too many options. This is what we don't want to do. What we do want to do, as we're holding space, we're holding this beautiful container with all this information. It's in the space that, given this information, we have to make a decision. Now, what is a decision? A decision is, given the information we have, what action are we going to take in taking that action? So this is step 3. Step 3, we've created space. We're holding this beautiful container that's now filled with whatever information is reasonable at this point in time. And now we have to make a decision that leads us to take action. Take that step that you believe is the best thing that you can do given the information you have, given what the experts are telling you, given what the data is telling you, given what your own body is telling you, given what your trusted friends are telling you. Given all this information, what is the best decision you can make at this point in time? Take action. Now, is that action going to lead to the best outcome possible? Maybe, probably not. Hopefully, you've done a good job and that action leads to some sort of outcome that is helpful and isn't causing harm, right? That's a good decision, right? A good decision is one that leads to a beneficial outcome and minimizes harm. Whether or not that was a good decision, you're now stepping into step 4. And this is also everything. Steps 1 through 3 are beautiful, but they're not going to lead to the real transformation our world needs to see right now. They're only going to lead to one step, to one action. And maybe that action was powerful, maybe not. But regardless, step 4 now needs to happen. And that is to look at the decision you made, the action you took, and the outcome of that decision. What happened? What happened when you took that action? Did you experience the benefit that you hoped to experience? Did you cause any harm? Was something completely unintended popping up? What happened? This is when we get to learn. And this is arguably the most important piece, learning. We are never going to take perfect actions. We're never going to have perfect information that leads to perfect outcomes. That's not the world we live in. We make decisions based off of the best information we have possible at the time. We take action, and then we learn. What happens as we learn? We get to repeat the cycle. So you took action, something happened. Now what gets to happen? Press the fucking pause button. Take a step back. Now you get to create a new container. A new container that you can now fill with even more information because you now have your own data based on your own experience. Do you want to do more of the action you just did? Do you want to never take that action again because the consequences were so bad? Do you want to tweak it a little bit? Do you need to go listen to another expert or read a different book? Do you need to do something to bring in more information? Or do you still have enough information that you can tweak your action a little bit and keep taking steps? So you see what happens here. Sure, we have a 4-step process, but really all we're doing is taking step after step, doing so at a pace where we're not caught up in anything. We're not caught up in our emotion. We're not caught up in some idea that we've come to believe is everything. We're taking action. We're being in the experience of that action. We're learning from the results. And all the while, we're taking our time to have the space to really be able to move with as much skill through it all. Whew. How does that sound, you guys? Is that something that you think you can maybe apply to some situation in your life? Whether that's, again, something you're dealing with your own self, maybe your own health challenge, be that physical or mental. Is that something that you could take with you into your work in the world? Now, think about that for a second. As you're thinking about it, feel into your body. Be in a felt experience where you can hold space for anything to trickle up. And what I'm going to do is start to end today's episode with this one little tidbit that is everything. I really believe it's everything in regard to holding the piece of the puzzle that is going to enable us to actually create the transformation that we need to see in this world. And this is what I learned while I've spent the last few years really doing all I can to be intentional as I've worked through my own challenges, my own mental health struggles, my own struggles with PTSD, and also continuing to show up to put my work out in the world, right? All these different challenges. Now, here's what I've learned. What I now recognize is that if we can truly walk this path, if we can truly be aligned in this experience, aligned meaning that we are listening to what's going on outside of ourselves, listening to what's going on within ourselves. And if we can make the most skillful decisions possible, what gets to unfold is that the path that unfolds as a series of one outcome after the next. This path that unfolds will unfold in the greatest good of all for each and every one of us, living, breathing beings on this planet Earth. Let me say it another way. If you find yourself making decisions that are harming others, then I ask that you reevaluate. If you find yourself making decisions that are hurting yourself for the greater good of others, then I ask that you reevaluate. Now, I understand that perfection is a thing that exists in our heads and not in the real world. And I understand that our world is messy and complicated. So when I say that all outcomes are for the greatest good of all living beings, sometimes it doesn't look that way immediately. So yes, there's a little bit of wiggle room as I make this statement because, again, we can't see the whole picture from where we're standing at one point in time. But what I've really come to believe and experience and hear from others in this sort of space, it is this, that if we can really walk this path, again, holding space for our own selves, for all of life outside of ourselves, if we can walk this path, making decisions, given the best information we have possible at any point of time, the path that gets to unfold will truly be for the greatest good of all. So I continue to walk these lands in my backyard forest, a forest that, for the most part, seems to be transforming into a desert. And also seems to be coming back, not necessarily in the way that it was before. The ponderosa forest is not coming back in the full force that it was. But as I walk these trails and I continue to work through my own shit and I continue to work in service for the world and I continue to tune in to what's happening on the land that I'm walking on, it's this knowing that keeps growing within me. It's knowing that my next action, if it is the most skillful, it's going to help me mentally, physically, spiritually, and it's gonna help this land. And if at any point I get caught up in something that's harmful to me, mentally, physically, is harmful to the land, then I know that I'm not on the right path. And it's this way of walking through this world that I want to leave you with today as you face your own challenges, as you continue to be in service to the world. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave us today. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode.